Westlake Recording Studios, Los Angeles. The most famous man in the world sat alone in a darkened studio, staring at his reflection in the glass booth. Michael Jackson had just delivered the biggest album in music history with Thriller, but success had become a prison that was slowly suffocating his soul. The next 3 years would produce some of his greatest artistic achievements, while simultaneously marking the beginning of his descent into the isolation and paranoia that would define the rest of his life. This is the story of the bad era, when the king of pop reached his creative zenith while losing pieces of himself that he would never recover. But to understand Michael's darkness during this period, you have to understand the impossible position Thriller had put him in. The album had sold over 40 million copies worldwide, made him the most recognizable person on the planet, and created expectations that no human being could realistically meet. Every move he made was scrutinized, every appearance was analyzed, every creative decision was judged against the impossible standard of following up the biggest album of all time. The pressure wasn't just professional, it was existential. How do you top perfection? How do you improve on a miracle? The creative process for Bad began with Michael in a state of artistic paralysis. He would spend hours in the studio, surrounded by instruments and recording equipment, unable to write a single note. The spontaneous creativity that had always defined his music felt blocked, replaced by a crushing awareness of global expectations and commercial pressures. Quincy Jones, his longtime producer and collaborator, watched Michael struggle with a perfectionism that had crossed the line from artistic excellence into psychological torment. Working with Quincy on Bad would prove to be their final collaboration, though neither of them knew it at the time. Their partnership had produced Off the Wall and Thriller, 2 albums that had redefined popular music and established Michael as the undisputed king of pop. But by 1987, the dynamic between them had shifted. Michael was no longer the eager young artist seeking guidance from an experienced mentor. He was a global superstar who wanted complete creative control, and Quincy represented the collaborative approach that Michael was beginning to see as a limitation rather than an asset. The recording sessions for Bad became a psychological battlefield where Michael's growing isolation collided with his desperate need for artistic validation. He would arrive at the studio wearing disguises, sometimes spending entire days in the booth without removing his sunglasses or speaking to anyone except through the intercom. The man who had once thrived on collaboration was becoming increasingly unable to tolerate the presence of other people, even those who had helped create his greatest successes. The title track Bad emerged from Michael's need to project toughness in a world that had begun to question his masculinity and authenticity. The song was his attempt to silence critics who suggested that his success had softened him, that his crossover appeal had somehow diminished his credibility. But the aggressive posturing felt forced, like a costume that didn't quite fit. Michael was trying to be something he wasn't, and the strain of maintaining this image was visible in every aspect of the recording process. The collaboration with Martin Scorsese on the Bad music video should have been a triumph, bringing together 2 masters of their respective arts to create something unprecedented. Instead, it became another source of stress and artistic compromise. Scorsese wanted to shoot in actual urban locations with real gang members, but Michael's security team and legal advisors deemed it too dangerous. The final product, shot on elaborate sets with professional dancers, felt sanitized compared to Scorsese's original vision, another reminder that Michael's fame had become a barrier to authentic artistic expression. Smooth Criminal represented Michael at his creative peak, a song that showcased his ability to blend pop accessibility with innovative production techniques and compelling storytelling. The track's unique rhythm and Michael's vocal performance demonstrated that his artistic abilities were sharper than ever, even as his personal life was becoming increasingly chaotic. But even this creative triumph was overshadowed by the growing media fascination with his changing appearance and eccentric behavior. The plastic surgery rumors that had begun circulating during the Thriller era became a constant source of media speculation during the Bad period. Michael's nose appeared different in every public appearance, and his skin tone seemed to be gradually lightening, leading to endless tabloid stories and public speculation. Michael claimed the skin changes were due to vitiligo, a condition that destroys melanin-producing cells. But the explanation did little to quiet the rumors or reduce the psychological pressure he felt every time he appeared in public. The Bad World Tour, which ran from 1987 to 1989, was both Michael's greatest professional achievement and his most isolating personal experience. The tour broke attendance records, grossed over $125 million, and was seen by over 4.4 million people across the globe. But for Michael, each performance was a reminder of how disconnected he had become from normal human interaction. He traveled from city to city in a bubble of security and protocol, rarely able to experience the places he visited or connect with people outside his immediate entourage. The loneliness that defined Michael's life during this period was perhaps most evident in his relationships with children. He began spending increasing amounts of time with young people, claiming they were the only ones who saw him as a person rather than as a celebrity. Critics and tabloids would later use these relationships as ammunition against him, but during the bad era, they represented his desperate attempt to maintain some connection to innocence and authenticity in a life that had become increasingly artificial and controlled. Working on Man in the Mirror, one of the album's most powerful tracks, became an exercise in painful self-reflection for Michael. The song's message about personal change and social responsibility felt deeply personal, reflecting his own struggle to understand what he had become and what role he should play in a world that both worshipped and scrutinized him. The recording sessions for this track were some of the most emotionally intense of his career, with Michael breaking down in tears as he sang about making changes in his own life. The commercial success of Bad was overwhelming, but it felt hollow to Michael in ways that were difficult for others to understand. The album debuted at #1, spawned 5 #1 singles, and sold over 30 million copies worldwide. By any measure, it was a triumph that cemented his status as the biggest entertainer in the world. But success on this scale had become a burden rather than a joy, proof that he was trapped in a cycle of expectations and achievements that offered no real satisfaction or peace. The end of the Bad era in 1989 marked the conclusion of Michael's partnership with Quincy Jones and the beginning of his descent into the even more troubling periods that would define his later career. The 3 years from 1987 to 1989 had produced some of his greatest music while simultaneously documenting his transformation from a beloved entertainer into a troubled recluse who would spend the rest of his life struggling with the consequences of unprecedented fame. Looking back, the Bad era stands as both Michael Jackson's creative peak and the beginning of his personal decline. The album and tour demonstrated his unparalleled ability to create music that could unite people across all cultural and geographic boundaries. But they also revealed the terrible cost of fame at the level Michael had achieved, the way that global adoration could become a form of imprisonment that gradually destroyed the very qualities that had made someone special in the first place. The man who entered Westlake Recording Studios in 1987 was still recognizably the same person who had moonwalked across American television stages just a few years earlier. The man who emerged in 1989 was something else entirely, a global icon whose artistic achievements were overshadowed by personal struggles that would define the remainder of his life. The Bad era didn't just produce great music. It documented the transformation of Michael Jackson from a performer into a cautionary tale about the price of fame in the modern world.